I have just got back from a 7-day shoot in Tuscany with the Blackmagic PYXIS, and I'm going to tell you how it did. First of all, this was a commercial shoot, so I wasn't just wandering around trying to get the most aesthetic shots for a review of this camera, and this is not that review either. I will be doing a review, but I want to use it on other shoots first. I don't want to just have it, hold it, look at it, and do what, frankly, a lot of people tend to do, which is just give their immediate opinions without actually having put it through a lengthy process on different shoots in different environments. Also, this means that this is part of a client project, and they have very kindly said that I can show you this footage before it's launched, so massive thank you to the Fish Site and Mauritz in particular. This footage will be part of a cookbook and series that they're producing, focusing on fish and seafood with a Tuscan twist, so make sure you check them out as well. I think that this being a commercial project is important to mention, as shooting real projects brings a certain set of expectations and pressures that are just not present when you're shooting for fun. Having said that, it was an incredibly fun and delicious shoot, and the whole team really pulled together to get things working, which meant some very long days. I think I've clocked between 50 and 70 hours filming with the PYXIS, so not just camera on recording, like wearing it, using it, rigging it, all of that kind of stuff. And I can give you some pretty informed insights into what that was like. The goal of the shoot was to capture that sort of cookbook vibe, not a million miles away from some of the more beautiful shots in Chef's Table and other cooking shows that you'll be familiar with. In terms of how I would be working on this as DOP, I knew we were aiming to shoot the majority of the content outside, but based out of a single location in the Tuscan countryside. I also wouldn't have an assistant with me, and the other shooter was the director, Reese, who would be working on a Pocket 6K for the wider shots. With that in mind, I needed to have a setup that I could run for long stretches and be quite nimble, enough to get, a variety of shots throughout any particular recipe video. That leads me neatly on to choosing how to rig for the shoot. The creative direction for this from Reese and Mauritz was leaning towards that handheld vibe, so the first decision I had to make was how I was going to do that on these long shoot days. I have an easy rig, and I also have a selection of Open Moon cine saddles, or I suppose I could have gone the option of like pure handheld, but that was kind of out of the question for me on a 7-day shoot with lengthy takes. I didn't want to be hand holding this rig, just for my back. So even with a lighter rig, I think I still would have wanted some support, and this kind of boiled down to, in the end, how I was going to be able to move around and change heights and get different shots most effectively, and that naturally then came around to the easy rig. I actually felt I would probably get a more stable shot with the cine saddle setup, but also I would probably be a little bit slower to change between different heights when I was shooting, so the easy rig was just the one. This led to a few quick purchases on Amazon because I only got the camera on Saturday, so I didn't actually have the camera in my hands until a day before the shoot. So I had to kind of eyeball things that I thought would work and then just purchase them on Amazon and then put it all together on the Saturday when I got the camera. First off, I needed a top handle, and I decided to get a top plate to go with that. And the majority of these bits of rigging are from Small Rig, and I'll list everything out below. If you're interested and you're looking for stuff that you know will fit and work, you can check that list out. The top handle probably could have mounted directly onto the PYXIS with the NATO rail that came with it, but I wanted to have the top plate just here because when I'm setting up for a shoot, I want the flexibility. So I want to know that if after a day of using it I find that I actually need to move that handle a little bit further back for the balance of the camera. So I want to have the little granular options that the top plate gives you to move things forward or back or side to side or whatever you want. Now, deciding to get the top plate was lucky because the Blackmagic Ursa Cine viewfinder that I got with this needs the Blackmagic Ursa Cine handle to actually mount it, or that's the way that Blackmagic are intending it to be mounted, and that's what you will have seen in all the photos. But that top handle is not shipping yet. I was actually quite worried, and then when I got hold of everything and actually held it in my hands, figured out that actually it's all just based around standard 15mm rods. When I got it, I wasn't sure that I was going to get, you know, the rods and everything. I thought that I might just be getting like the viewfinder itself, which would have been rather tricky because that's a much more proprietary style mount, that little dovetail just there. So the 15mm rods, I was able to use a little Small Rig 15mm rod support, screw that on top, and then put the rods and the mount into that. Now, actually, subsequently looking at this, I was able to find out this is just a 19mm rod, so there will be other options, and I've got some coming for that. It's not the neatest solution perhaps, but it's workable and it gave me what I needed. It also gave me a little point when I had this mounted further forwards to put my PD Movie wireless follow focus on. The follow focus was not essential, but I much prefer to use one when I'm handheld because it keeps my hands further away from the kind of center of rotation of the camera, and that aids the stability of the shots because I can have it off to the side, use the thumb wheel, and I can have the hands further out, and that means that any little movements that I make are having a smaller effect on whether the camera moves than if it's right in the center of the lane. A little movement will have a bigger effect. On the right hand side, I mount a Small Rig handle which has a 3/8 and Arri locking pin mount, and that goes directly into the side of the PYXIS. That was also where I positioned the thumb wheel for the follow focus just there, and that worked really well. I could get to it with my thumb, I could get to it with my finger. In an ideal world, I suppose it would be in a slightly better position, but that worked perfectly fine. Battery solution was a tricky one, as I didn't want to drop all of that cash on a sensible BPU solution for the long shoot days. Luckily, a friend of mine who's also a DOP, Ethan Russell, lent me his super solid set of Bebob V-Lock batteries, which gave me 4 156 watt-hour batteries to play with and a sensible charger so I could charge them all at once. That also meant I had to get a D-tap to the 2-pin LEMO that's on the back of the camera. No problem. And then I also got a V-mount plate that mounted to the 15mm rails rods that I've got on the camera as well. And that gave me a sensible way of putting the battery on the back and then building everything off the Small Rig block that was underneath with those 15mm rods. I also wanted to mount my Axoon Cine Viewmaster 4K I'm trying out for client preview and an on-camera monitor for me. At this point, I ran into some challenges as both the battery and the CineView foul the connections on the side of the camera on the right-hand side just here. So if you slide them right up flat, then you can't get to the SDIs, you can't get to the USB-C port, and you can't get to the on-off switch just there. That is perhaps one of the downsides of the flush kind of array that you've got at the back here. A lot of cameras choose to have everything on the back with the connections mounted at a little bit of an angle. I guess that with this Blackmagic are thinking that the BPU solution is what you will be going for, so it doesn't matter. But if you do go with a V-Lock, then you need to have it slightly further away so that you can clearly access those SDI ports, the USB-C and the on-off switch, and also I suppose the CF Express Type B slots. I tried a few different variations and settled on having the V-mount kind of mounted backwards as close as possible to the ports, and then the Cine Viewmaster on the back mounted with a little cold chew adapter screwed to the little block of the V-mount adapter plate that I had. Final little bits and pieces, as the battery only had a single D-tap port on top, I had to get an extender which I could then screw into the top plate to keep it all neat and tidy. However, that extender came with a lot of excess cable. I didn't realize that it was going to come with like a foot of curly cable, so it made things a little bit messy, messier than I would like. I ended up putting the excess cable really in that little kind of BPU battery garage just there to keep everything a little bit neater. Not ideal, but worked perfectly well. The sound recorder's Callum also stuck a little bit of hook and loop on top of the camera to mount the tentacle sync so that we could all have everything going in with timecode. Really, really useful on long shoot days. And I like that this camera has a dedicated, proper timecode import. When you have to use your audio in, it's not ideal. It's not a locking connector. It means that in post there's one extra step of having to take the timecode from the sound, which is fine, it's easy enough to do, but it's just one extra step. I also had an iPhone mount on the top of the handle for monitoring with the Axoon C app from that CineView Master. Lens-wise, I was on my Canon FD glass. Now going back a few years, that really didn't get much of an outing because all of the Canon FD lenses have a shallower flange depth than the Canon EF mount did, and therefore it's very difficult to adapt it to anything that is EF mount. This, because obviously we're on an L mount just here, no problem whatsoever. So I've got a little adapter just there, and then I could just put the Canon FD glass on. Works perfectly. Had a 28mm, a 35mm, 50mm, 85, and a 135. Though ultimately, on this shoot, we only ended up using the 50mm and the 85mm because I was going for those really nice close-up and kind of long lens, medium wide shots. And when I did use that, it was nice because I was further away from the subject and you get that background compression coming in when you are further away from the subject. Overall, that made the rig that I was rocking fairly heavy, and the easy rig was definitely necessary to make it practical. I knew this would be the case going into it, and actually I don't mind the extra weight. It helps to give the shots a feeling of inertia and stability, and with a larger battery I was able to shoot for hours before changing it. 156 watt hours, powered the PYXIS, the EVF and the CineView Master, and also potentially my iPhone as well. Generally, in a 12-hour shoot day, I'd get through 3 of those batteries with very minimal powering down. Like maybe I powered down at lunchtime, but generally I just kind of left everything on running the whole time. For some context here, over the years, I have used many big camera rigs, you know, Ronin 2s, Ursa Minis, all that kind of thing. So I'm fairly used to the size, bulk, and all of that. And this did end up, to me, feeling a little bit like an Ursa Mini with that rigging in terms of size and weight, and I really didn't mind that. I will be exploring some more nimble setups on shoots that I have coming up, so don't worry, you will see some stuff with the PYXIS which is kind of more pared down. Over the course of the 7-day shoot, this setup worked perfectly well for me. The only real downside was the position of the connectors relative to the V-mount battery on the back. That's the only thing that I found to be a little bit frustrating. Right, that's it for the camera rigging side of things. Next, I want to cover how I actually used the camera and specifically what we were capturing, the kind of setups we were doing. As I've mentioned, the majority of the shots were going to be day exteriors, although we did end up lighting some evening setups, and on 2 days we were actually forced inside due to rain, so I did some fairly elaborate lighting setups for that, which I'll cover in another video. For the daytime exteriors, I really relied on that EVF, and it basically allowed me to shoot and eliminated all of the glare from the sky and the sun. So it's really nice to be able to use that as a reliable way of framing and focusing. As a glasses wearer, I had initially thought that I would be using the foam eyepiece because it just felt better to me, but then I ended up having to change out to the rubber eyepiece for practicality. It just cut out a little bit more of the light that was getting around the edges. For me and my glasses, I find that even though the diopters on the EVFs are great, they are not strong enough for my really, really poor vision. So I still have to wear my glasses whilst I'm using the EVF. I can't adjust it enough to actually be able to just look through the EVF without the glasses at all. On top here you have 6 buttons, and those were awesome. The ones that I used mostly were the start, stop, record and the punch in. So you can zoom in, which really helps the focusing. You can also control other stuff like false color, LUT, focus assist, and hiding or showing the on-screen information. Really nice to have access to that just really quickly by your hand and not have to worry about the side, especially because I found myself wanting to lock the controls on the side in case I bumped them. So yeah, I didn't want to have to constantly be unlocking and locking, and most of the time I was able to do what I needed to from the EVF just there. I changed between the mounts on the EVF a few times where For example, here I've just got the direct short mount where you kind of are right in next to the camera. I also switched out to the extension so that I'd be able to lower the camera down, sort of rest it on my side, on my hip, tuck it under my arm, and then still be able to have the EVF at like head height. That's really nice because when I have a monitor on the camera, I find myself with that setup, and I do like doing that setup where you kind of got locked in at hip height, it just cranes my neck downwards to look at the monitor that I have on top of the camera. With this, I could have the extension up, I could have the EVF here, and I could have my head and neck in a much better position. Found that after shooting for a day in that position with the camera locked up here, I didn't have a sore neck, I didn't find that I was straining at all, so that's really nice not to put extra strain on your body when you're doing a long shoot like this. When I wasn't using the extension arm, I had a little pouch on the side of the Easy Rig where I could just take it off, drop it in, so it was fairly straightforward to switch in and out even without an assistant on that shoot. I would say that overall the EVF mount does add a reasonable amount of bulk to the rig, and I did find myself having to like balance things out a little bit when I was moving the EVF and the mount around. It's a bit of extra weight. I am really keen to try some lighter weight setups, and indeed I've already done one this week on a dance shoot which was a lot more like this, just with BPU battery in the back, and yeah, kind of using it more handheld, pared down just as a box. Bonus, if you don't like hornets the size of your thumb kind of buzzing around your ear and you're wearing a wind cheater, you can kind of go full Kenny from South Park and just pull the hood up around the eyepiece, and then you don't get the hornets distracting you mid-shot and making you lose your shot. Doesn't do anything for ginger cats though. You know, they will just sneak up on you and then try and climb your leg, so haven't found a good repellent for that. Monitoring wise, the CineView iPhone combo worked really well, taking SDI feed out into the CineView Master 4K. I actually ended up mostly using the wireless connection to my phone rather than the direct wired connection that it offers, primarily because then I can just take the phone off and hand it to Reese the director or someone else who needs to see the shot, and I don't need to do anything and it's just there constantly. Also, the wireless transmission was shockingly good. Like, for the iOS version of it, I was really surprised that it was basically okay for me to do some gentle focus pulling on. I certainly didn't expect that whenever I've used wireless connections from other manufacturers, and even Axon's own smaller CineView Nano, it isn't as quick. It doesn't get the image to a point where you can focus, but I did do some gentle focus pulling on this on some setups, and it worked fine. I had intended to take the iPad and give that to people, but because we were outside so much, it really didn't happen. On the rainy days indoors, yes, I did use the iPad and we gave that to someone on the table, and that worked great. Nothing really to add. ND filters are something you are going to need to consider because this has no internal ND solution. I opted for the Hoya Pro NDs, and because we're on these Canon FDs, they all have the unified front thread of 52mm. That means that I was able to pick up a set of Hoya Pro NDs, and they weren't that expensive. Now, the challenge with NDs, and indeed something Blackmagic cameras have suffered from in the past, is being very sensitive to infrared light. And the more ND you add, if the ND doesn't compensate for that and take that infrared light out, you get more and more infrared as you step up the strength of the NDs. Now, I've used the Pro NDs before when I was working on an Ursa Mini 4.6K prior to them getting the Gen 1 and Gen 2 update where they had internal NDs. I was using Hoya Pro NDs. They handle the IR pollution very well, and I thought, I know these will work, I'll just get a set of those, and they're small and they're not expensive. It did mean that I had to screw them on and off, but because most of the time when I was working outside, it was like one strength of ND that was needed, and then if we changed to a different setup and the light had changed, I could just switch it out, so it wasn't too much of a chore, to be honest. I also didn't fancy doing the variable ND because it can affect the out of focus areas a bit, and also you get those weird shifts of polarization that you don't necessarily intend, and potentially also I could get some IR pollution as well. So this was what I'd opted for, and it worked really, really nicely. If you are looking for some NDs, I do recommend the Hoya Pro NDs. Camera operation, if you've ever used Blackmagic cameras before, this is going to feel really familiar to you. It's basically identical in terms of the user interface on the side, very intuitive if you haven't used it though, and I don't think anyone's going to have too much of an issue. Most of the interactions that I had with the operator side menus and everything just here was switching between the off speed and sync speed options, and then also changing ISO or white balance. Also, sometimes I'd be jumping into the menu to get to the different sensor crops, changing the resolution. For this project, for data management, we were keeping everything at a 4K DCI crop on this. So that meant that the PYXIS and the other camera, the Pocket 6K, were both at 4K DCI. There were a few exceptions to this where I needed to jump to 100 or 120 frames. Obviously, I would be going to a lower resolution and a more extreme crop to get that. But that was more a specialty shot where we wanted something really, really slow motion for a beauty shot, something like that. On a few specific shots, I did go to the full open gate of the sensor just for the best noise performance. And yeah, maybe, you could do some reframing options. You could cut a vertical frame out of it, that kind of thing. But that was pretty rare. Aside from that, I'd say everything just worked, no real surprises. Only exception was on the 6th day of shooting when I did a battery swap, I lost my SDI signal out, which gave me a very nervous few moments thinking that I had done my SDI protocol of powering down and disconnecting the wrong way and blown the SDI port. That isn't a Blackmagic specific thing, that's just a SDI port thing. You have to do it in a certain way, otherwise at some point you are likely to blow your SDI port. After a couple of minutes of calm investigation, I found that the camera had actually switched the SDI output back to 4K, which the CineView wasn't set up for. So switching it back to 1080p, brought everything back. Relief washed over me like a calming wave. Make sure that you respect the SDI ports on your cameras. This camera only has one SDI port. You do not want to blow it. Camera chat, rigging chat done. How is the footage from the PYXIS? This is where I might be less controversial than some camera YouTubers, and potentially also more controversial and maybe offensive. Who knows? If you can't manage to make an image that is nice with almost any of the cameras from the past 10 years, the problem isn't that the camera is bad. Part of the skill of being a DOP, or working DOP, is that you understand the limits and strengths of your equipment. Now, that could be lights, it could be cameras, it could be anything else that you're using. So in a very basic sense, if you're trying to light a shot and you don't have enough firepower from your lights to get to the level you want, you're going to be frustrated and you're going to blame the light and say, it's not looking right, the light's wrong. Well, yeah. But also you are not working within the limitations of the equipment that you have. Likewise, with the camera, there are always going to be some things that are limitations with it. Now that might be that you're shooting on an Arri Alexa 65 and you're cursing out the camera because you don't have enough light to get a deep depth of field because it's got a massive bloody sensor and you're at T1.4. and you can't get everything in focus. So at that point, you don't have enough light. This damn camera is not suitable. It's really bad. It's all out of focus. It's terrible. That's a preposterous way of looking at things, but that is a little bit how people feel when they're reviewing cameras and they talk about things. There are limitations. There are things which are going to be weaker on this camera than other cameras out there. There are things that are stronger on this camera than other cameras out there. All of the cameras that are available at the moment are able to make a good image if you work within their limitations and you understand them. Bringing the footage into Resolve, that all said, I thought that it looked really good. The majority of the shots were not using the whole sensor, closer to a Super 35 crop of that sensor, and the compression was set to 8:1. So in terms of latitude, there was probably more to be had, and a lower compression setting using the whole sensor would probably give that to you. But everything sits nicely within the range the camera has. I didn't feel that I was particularly at risk of nasty clipping at any points, in the highlights. There were a couple of shots which were more run and gun, like this one of Mauritz moving some equipment with the tractor. My exposure was a little hot and I clipped the sky. But when I brought this into Resolve, I was actually astonished how well the highlight recovery feature is working with this camera. I'm not going to make a habit of doing that, but looking at this, it pulled back information and recreated information that just was not there. So that, I suppose, and more testing will be needed, and you can be more empirical with this, no doubt. That means that you actually have greater dynamic range than you might actually think in the highlights. I was making a habit of rating the camera to ISO 800, and that remaps the range that you do have to give a slightly favored range to the highlights. I prefer to do that outside, and it's more likely to me that I'm going to want to recover a highlight than recover some shadows when I'm shooting outside. We did push to 3200 for some shots where we were heading towards blue hour, and I would say that if you're coming from Canon and Sony land, you may get scared by the presence of some texture and noise here. But a raw image will always need some kind of noise reduction to get it to the place where you will be used to from those cameras when they are recording in the non-RAW formats. And indeed, it does clean up without any heavy effort particularly. Now, I was lighting most of the night scenes, and I did have plenty of firepower, so I could have at that point rated the camera all the way down to ISO 400 and probably shot at a higher f-stop. But the intention of using 3200 was allow some of those practical sources to actually play in the shot. So the candles, for example, and the lights in the villa in the background, or the fire that was being used to cook, they actually do have an effect on the subjects. And by keeping my lighting in that range, it helped to make things feel less starkly lit. I also actually used the lights with some fire effect, so they were a little bit more moving, a little bit more textural, and that all hopefully helps to keep it feeling like it's justified. Now I'm going to show you a couple of these shots were captured at the full open gate, and they really do look great. I love it when it's like blue hour and you have the subject kind of silhouetted against the sky, and then they're coming in and they're, I don't know, blowing on a coal or lighting a match and then lighting a candle, and that just being the illumination for the face. It's really nice. It reminds me of that old lighting test that they had for the Red One, where like Leonardo DiCaprio is sitting there and he strikes a match and he smokes a cigar, and it's like all playing on his face, and everyone was like, wow, we can do things with firelight, and we don't need to come in and do a gag for it every single time. That blew people's minds. I did have a daylight sequence in the barn that was sort of all artificially lit because it was raining outside. And again, the camera does a great job of capturing detail and texture in this situation under that LED lighting. I was using 3 powerful Duan lights outside and 1 inside, in fact 2 inside, because I had one of them firing up into the ceiling to keep the ambient level in the area consistent as the daylight dropped, and then we moved into evening. Where everything is staged like that, it allows you to shoot all day and into the night, so you don't have the fluctuations level. So it is really efficient, and we got a lot of shots done in that barn. So it was actually quite fun. I do enjoy when I get to mess around with lighting. You know, that's part of the pleasure. But you know, running gun stuff is cool. Okay, grading. Over the past few days, I have been pulling into Resolve, and I mentioned that I can push and pull the highlights. My general impression is that this feels very much like other Blackmagic cameras I've used. Without a direct side-by-side comparison, it's hard to be definite, but like in the abstract, yeah, I kind of recognize the stuff that's going on, and that all feels good. There's plenty of detail. I'd say, you know, actually probably more detail than a lot of the Blackmagic cameras that I've used in the past. This has really got a very nice sensor, and I can just feel when I'm zooming in that it's retaining a lot of information there. Colors are good. Even just with a standard color managed workflow, everything just feels pleasing, and hopefully, you know, you're looking at this, you can judge yourself. But yeah, it's rich, it's sumptuous, and there's nothing really to criticize with it particularly. It just looks good. As I mentioned, plenty of latitude for recovering highlights. With a bit of tweaking, I found that I've got some nice options on a natural, earthy, warm grade for some of these shots as a starting point. And I've also experimented with some film emulations, which it takes very well, either using Film Convert or Resolve's built-in film emulation tools. B-raw files from the PYXIS, I needed to update Resolve to work with them, so something has changed a little bit just there. I also don't have much of a frame of reference for the original Cinema Camera 6K, so if you were going to ask in the comments, I haven't really used it that much, so yeah, can't tell you if this is better or not. Okay, let's sum this all up. After a week shooting with the PYXIS and dozens of hours of real-world experience, how does it stack up? A lot of people are going to make that comparison with the original cinema camera 6K because it's got the same sensor in theory, and suggesting maybe that is a better option, being less expensive and having the articulating screen on the back already. Personally, I've never been a fan of the second gen pocket camera body style format. For me, it's too far from being a true nimble mirrorless camera and not close enough to being a more production focused cinema camera. I have used them a lot, but I found working with the PYXIS far more enjoyable. It is more my cup of tea, but your tastes may vary on that. Rolling shutter is a concern that I had when the initial cinema camera 6K came out, and in theory this has the same sensor as well. I haven't done any like scientific testing on this, but I didn't have any issues with it on this shoot. Like I wasn't whipping around trying to follow fast moving subjects or anything like that. It didn't rear its head, I didn't feel it, I didn't notice it. A side note, if you step to the different sensor crops, you'll get a faster readout speed. So if you're working at Super 35, this will likely see a substantial increase in the readout, and you can tell that because you can get higher frame rates as you step through those different sensor crops. So if you needed to do something and you wanted a faster readout speed, that is the compromise for you to make, and that is you knowing your equipment and playing to its strengths. Go on a wider lens and go to the sensor crop, and you can do whatever you were trying to do and you were finding perhaps the readout speed wasn't good enough for. Again, I'm talking about this if you're treating this like a tool and it's the tool you have. Know where to push your tools and where to really lean into them, and know where to ease off and work with it, and you'll get the best results. So far on this shoot, I've really enjoyed using the PYXIS. It's been fun to work with this camera. It's been fun to work with a new camera in this new format. And for me, just so that everyone knows what I'm going into this and the discussions that I'm having when I do a shoot like this, I own a Canon C70 and a Pocket 4K. So I could have absolutely done this shoot with either of those. In terms of usability, the Pocket 4K would have been, for me, way less suitable as a choice than this. The form factor, it's never been my favorite. The battery solutions, it feels clunky, it's got a fixed screen. I would not have enjoyed that camera as much as I enjoyed this. The C70, on the other hand, is a tougher call to make. I own that camera because I'm DOP on some TV shows that have a very specific set of cameras that they will work with. There is a lot to like about that camera, and it would have done a fine job on the shoot if we'd just geared up with Canon C70s. It's got internal ND. If you're using lenses with autofocus, you've got that autofocus, astonishing dynamic range. However, there's also the workflow consideration, and Reese, the director, was already in the Blackmagic ecosystem and using Resolve. In addition, previous footage had been shot on his Pocket 6K, so it just made sense to work within the Blackmagic ecosystem for this. Balancing this all up then with the cameras that I own and that I have ready access to, I don't think I missed anything by taking the PYXIS, and I really enjoyed working with it. The rig worked perfectly for the shots that I was getting, and it made me work in a particular way, which perhaps with the C70 I wouldn't have. I would have been working in a very different way, and I didn't have the EVF for that. So that would have also been a consideration. I'd have been working more off the small screen or top monitor. So it would have felt different, and maybe it would have been harder outside to focus manually. So all considerations, your workflow is going to be different, your experience is going to be different. But yeah, that's my take on it. The footage is gorgeous. Picturesque location like Tuscany helps. Can't wait to take the PYXIS out on some more shoots. Commercial work, narrative pieces that I've got coming up over the next few weeks. Next stop is going to be Miami, hopefully on Sunday. And I will have that full review coming once I've done some more of those shoots. So if you have any questions, any comments, drop them down below. I am more than happy to answer them. I will have more PYXIS content coming and just more general cinematography stuff. That's kind of what I do. So stay tuned.